What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we'll be going over some high upside running backs that I would be targeting this season, and I'm making a rule for this video. I cannot include any of the top 15 running backs being drafted right now. Everyone knows they have a ton of upside, so it's not overly useful me telling you that Christian McCaffrey could go off this season. So I'll put a graphic on the screen now that shows who I'm excluding, just so we don't get a bunch of comments saying why not this player. But very quickly, for those of you who are listening on the podcast version, which I do recommend if you're listening away from home, you don't want to run at the gym, don't have Wi-Fi, don't want to use data, listen to the podcast. Pretty easy. So top 15 running backs. Christian McCaffrey, and this is in order. Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, Jonathan Taylor, Zeke Akers, Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, Joe Mixon, Najee Harris, Antonio Gibson, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So all those running backs are ineligible to be in this video because we know they all have a ton of upside. So we'll get into my list in a second, but first, gotta start things off. As usual, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was who converted the most two-point conversions last season. The answer is Dalvin Cook. And Connor Laughlin was the first to get that on YouTube. And at JulianPD19 was the first to get that on Twitter. Today's stat. Over the last 3 seasons, what rookie wide receiver has the earliest breakout age? All right, so who's got a ton of upside? Let's start things off with Mike Davis. Now, apparently, it's quad hype season, if you remember last season with A.J. Dillon. So ADPs are going to fluctuate basically based off of who has a really nice Instagram photo of their legs. But the fact of the matter is, Mike Davis has a running back 1 ceiling this season, and it's not overly unlikely that he hits that. I do not expect him to rush for like 1,100, 1,200 yards. That's probably being a bit optimistic, but only 8 running backs last season had over 1,000 rushing yards. There's only 4 going over 1,100. So you don't need to average, 75 rushing yards per game to be a running back 1. Eckler, Carson, Gaskin, they all finished as top 15 running backs in points per game last season with fewer than 60 rushing yards per game. Alvin Kamara, he was a top 2 running back depending on the scoring format. He only ran for 62 yards per game. So as long as you're part of a really good offense, you can rack up receptions, then you can finish as a running back 1 off of limited rushing volume. And if we look at what Mike Davis did last season, then there's plenty of reason for optimism here. We had 7 games with 5 or more receptions. 7 games, that is insane. Only Alvin Kamara and J.D. McKissic had more, with the vast majority of running backs falling way behind that number. Dalvin Cook and David Montgomery had just 4 games of 5 or more receptions. Aaron Jones had 3. Antonio Gibson only had 2. Kareem Hunt had only 1 game. So these are running backs that are known for their pass catching abilities. And then we take Mike Davis and we put him on an offense that we expect to finish top 3 in pass attempts per game, with his only competition being a wide receiver and an undrafted free agent. Like Mike Davis, I'm not going to say he's going to lead all running backs in receptions, but he's going to be up there. He was already up there last season, and his situation is even better. And he's going to do this while operating as the Falcons' goal line back. So again, as I've said a lot of times this offseason, they could add someone in free agency. But for the time being, he is one of the highest upside picks you can make, and it's not going to cost you a pick in the first 3 rounds. Next up, we've got another mid-round favorite of mine, and that's Myles Gaskin. Now, the Dolphins also did nothing in the draft, but they were slightly more active in free agency, adding Malcolm Brown. So the depth chart is Gaskin, Brown, and Ahmed in some sort of order. I'm pretty sure Gaskin's first. I don't 100% know if Ahmed or Brown is going to win that 2 spot. It doesn't really matter, but I just want to throw that out there. I'm not 100% sure who the backup would be, but I think Gaskin is the lead back. Now remember the title of this video. We're talking about upside. So we're going to go over how Gaskin could absolutely crush this season, but you should also remember, he's a former late 7th round pick. He's got a little over, 700 career rushing yards, and many people believed that he would be replaced this offseason. So you should not be shocked to see that he's the 37th safest running back on our website, according to our risk ratings. He's got, the upside to be a running back 1, and he's going late enough where I see it as a clear opportunity to take that risk because of the upside. But do not be surprised if you come back literally next week, and the Dolphins have traded for or signed a new running back. And Gaskin is just relegated to handcuff territory. So I just want to mention that because all the running backs on this list, if we talk about risk, they have risk, right? They're going late enough to where it's like, if they had all this upside and no risk, they'd obviously be going earlier. But I would say Gaskin, among all these running backs, has the biggest cliff that he could fall off if things go wrong. I mean, he could literally just be a handcuff come August if they bring someone really good onto the team. If they were to trade for Melvin Gordon or trade for a better running back or get someone who gets surprise cut. So I'm just bringing up options that they do have to where it's not a lock that he's going to go off. But until that happens, I think he's got incredible upside for a mid-round pick. I mean, just last season, he was running back 11 in points per game ahead of Jacobs, Carson, Eckler, Zeke, Gibson, Sanders, Swift, all of whom are being drafted ahead of him this season. And realistically, his season could have been a lot better. Jordan Howard was their goal line back for the first month or so, and he ended up stealing 4 goal line touchdowns on the season. In fact, Howard was only given 28 carries across 5 games for Miami, and he still tied Gaskin for the team lead in carries inside the 5-yard line with 9. If Gaskin had even 2 of those touchdowns that Howard stole, then he would have been tied for Jonathan Taylor for 9th in points per game. That's pretty incredible, and he got there because of the receptions. He had at least 2 receptions in all 10 games that he played in with over 20 receiving yards in 9 out of 10. That might not seem like a lot, but having a consistent reception floor keeps the duds away and it opens up more paths for ceiling weeks. And if we look ahead to this season, do we really expect teams to load the box against Gaskin? I mean, they've got Parker and Fuller on the outside, Waddle manning the slot. Gesicki's a fantastic option at tight end. And so having all of these weapons and the amount of speed that they have on the field means that safeties are going to need to be very careful if they're playing the run. Okay, because if you get drawn in to play action against this team and you've got Fuller and Waddle going deep, you're going to give up a lot of deep touchdowns. So teams are going to need to be very careful. That's going to open up some lanes for Gaskin. So I think that he's a great mid-round pick right now. But again, if anything happens, you got to realize we need to adjust our take. Next up, we've got the only rookie on this list, and that's Trey Sermon. Now, you could add Javonte Williams if you wanted to, but his ceiling is probably only unlocked if Melvin Gordon gets traded away or if Rodgers signs with the Broncos. But until one of those two things happens, he could certainly be a good pick, but the upside is only so high if they don't have Rodgers, if Melvin Gordon is still there. There's only so much he could do in fantasy. But Sermon doesn't need those things to happen. He just needs to secure the starting role. Now, if you followed me this offseason, you'll remember I've talked about 3 surefire running backs in this draft class. Harris, Etienne, Williams, in that order, are the best 3, and it's pretty clear. But I also mentioned Sermon is in a tier of his own at 4, and he's a guy that is not as sure a thing as these top 3, but is pretty clearly still ahead of the rest of this class. I thought that his value was heavily dependent on landing spot. And while landing spot might not look fantastic at first, it has the potential to be. His current competition for touches is Mostert, Jeff Wilson, and Wayne Gallman. Now, I actually think that's a sneaky good running back room. Obviously, Mostert is talented, but I think that Gallman is underrated. Wilson has proven to be a capable back if you give him the touches. So Sermon could for sure get 30% of the workload this season and end up as a complete and utter bust in fantasy. But remember the video. We're upside hunting here, and Sermon has league-winning upside in this offense if they choose to feature him. Under a breakout season, he would likely need Trey Lance to become the starter because that would shift the 49ers to a much more ground-based offense, and he would need the defense to at least go back to being above average. They fell apart a little bit late last season, and Sermon is gonna need positive game scripts to break out. But if all of those happen, Sermon could be a running back one this season. The 49ers have just by far the easiest strength of schedule this season when looking at their opponent's projected win totals. So if Kittle, Ayuk, Debo can all stay healthy and Sermon can win the job, then the 49ers could win a lot more games than people think. And that would be incredibly valuable to Sermon because this is an offense that we expect the running backs to produce much more in positive game scripts. There are some offenses where when they fall behind, they are peppering running backs with targets. That's not really the 49ers game plan. Like the 49ers, when they fall behind, they're going to use Ayuk and Debo and Kittle a lot more than the running backs. When they get ahead, though, they're very comfortable just feeding the running backs over and over and over again, and that's what can lead to spiked weeks. And if they're winning more games than we think they're going to win, and they've got all these positive game scripts, and Sermon wins the job, he could be really, really nice in fantasy, especially in the touchdown department, kind of like what Mostert was doing to close 2019. So I think he is a great upside pick as well. Next up, we've got Chase Edmonds. Edmonds was a pretty big loser in free agency, but was then a massive winner in like every single thing after that. Like right out of free agency, we see James Conner goes there and we're like, no. They're really just going to add running backs in free agency in the draft, and then they stopped, okay? So this has actually turned into a really good outcome for him, and yet people are blinded by that initial take. The initial take in the offseason was this is bad for Chase Edmonds because James Conner is there. They might add someone else. It's just going to be a crowded backfield. People keep that in their mind. But no one expected them to just enter the season with only Edmonds and Eno Benjamin as the two running backs, right? They had to sign or draft someone. So the fact that they added James Conner and then nothing else is a good thing, and look at the contract they gave James Conner. 1 year, $1.75 million. That is nothing. I mean, it's the same that Malcolm Brown is making in Miami. It's less than the 49ers gave Jeff Wilson. It's $500,000 less than the Lions gave Jamal Williams, less than Houston gave Mark Ingram, less than Jacksonville gave Carlos Hyde. It is a worse contract than the Broncos gave Mike Boone. So the Cardinals are under no obligation to give James Conner many snaps, and it's not like James Conner has been just electric these last 2 seasons. He hasn't been very good. But let's just say they do give him a few snaps. Look at what Chase Edmonds did last season. 850 total yards despite more than 8 carries only twice. And he scored 5 touchdowns despite 3 total carries inside the 10-yard line. Because even though Drake was the goal line back, they used Edmonds a ton out of the backfield when they got into the red zone. They liked him so much that he only had 2 fewer red zone targets than DeAndre Hopkins did. I mean, just imagine Chase Edmonds getting some of this goal line work. If he's able to get a full snap share, I mean, he could have 75 receptions, and in this offense, double-digit touchdowns is more than possible. So I am still targeting Chase Edmonds even with the James Conner signing because until I see Conner just dominating in camp or even being good in camp, I don't believe that he's a serious threat to Edmonds' role. And if that ends up being true, then Edmonds should be a running back one. Not could be, he should be a running back one if James Conner isn't used all that much. And he's not being drafted even close to that. Final running back we'll go over today is Tony Pollard. Now, Pollard is operated as the clear backup to Zeke over his first 2 seasons, producing 562 and 628 yards from scrimmage, respectively. Now, that is not what you're looking for from Pollard. Right? Like if we look at these last 2 seasons, you're not saying, oh, well, I hope they keep using him this much, right? You're drafting him for the upside. You're drafting him in the scenario that Zeke goes down, gets suspended. Something happens to Ezekiel Elliott because Pollard would step in and just be the featured back, right? And unfortunately, we've only seen this happen one time. I guess unfortunately for Pollard, fortunately for Zeke. But we've only seen this happen for 1 game over the 2 seasons Pollard's been in the NFL. And what do we see in week 15 last season? Well, Pollard gets 12 carries and 9 targets, converting that into 132 yards, 2 touchdowns, with 6 for 63 of that coming through the air. Tony Pollard is not a running back we are expecting to be fed 17 to 18 carries, even if Zeke goes down. So I want to make this abundantly clear. Ezekiel Elliott gets hurt this season. Tony Pollard steps in. He is not every single week getting fed carries, fed targets, fed touchdowns, right? Like, there are still a lot of weapons in this offense, a lot of very good receiving weapons. It's going to be a pass-first offense, and there's no reason to give Pollard a ton of carries. I would be more expecting like 14 to 15 carries a week, but maybe even 13 to 14 carries a week on average if Zeke went down. But I don't care, because the receptions and the touchdown upside would be massive. If Zeke goes down from injury, their backups are Tony Pollard, Rico Dowdle, and Siwo Olowinua, or I don't even know how to say his name, but these are two undrafted free agents that pose no threat to Tony Pollard. Okay, Pollard would instantly become a featured back with just incredible reception upside on a consensus top 5 offense that could definitely be the number 1 scoring offense this season. And on top of that, this isn't some scrub. Like, he's proven to be a quality running back when given the opportunity. He's actually been more efficient than Zeke in a ton of categories. Yards per carry, true yards per carry, yards per touch, breakaway rate, juke rate, production premium, yards created per touch. I mean, Pollard is awesome. And as you've heard me say a million times already, he's the type of running back we love to target, because if he gets the touches, we know he'll produce, because he contributes in so many different areas. He's not just on the ground, just through the air. He can produce on the ground, produce in the receiving game, produce with the touchdowns. So I love taking Pollard late, especially if you haven't drafted Zeke, because it just opens up so much more opportunity, so much more upside to your roster. So those are 5 running backs not going in the top 15 that I would be targeting this season for their upside. I only went over 5 players though, so if you want my take on every single draftable player, then you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.